morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today to find out all about the lessons our panellists have learned while running some fantastic projects in Sunderland. I'm Bev Gormley and I'm the Heritage Trust Network's Programme Manager. Before I hand over to Matthew Mckeague, who will be leading the webinar this morning, I just wanted to say a few words about the Heritage Trust Network, just in case you haven't come across us before. So HTN is the UK's umbrella body for heritage professionals, enthusiasts, groups, you name it, people who are rescuing and restoring the UK's heritage in a nutshell. We've got over 300 members at the moment, and peer-to-peer networking is a huge strength of ours. One of our massive member benefits is Toolkit, which is part of our website in a member-only area, and it's jam-packed with advice, case studies, how-to guides, videos, you name it, for our members. It's a really good resource to get into. I just wanted to give everybody a little reminder that next week is our conference week. We've got a whole week of events, and the actual conference day is next Friday. So please check out our website on our events page and book your tickets. Still some left. And throughout the year, we run lots of local events when we're able to. We run lots of webinars, training and workshops. And we're currently designing a new online community for our members so that they can network more effectively. I'll just give you a little bit of housekeeping. Just to reassure you, all attendees are muted, your webcams are off, so nobody can see anyone in their pajamas. There'll be a Q&A session at the end. The webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our website next week. About an hour after the webinar ends, you'll receive an email that includes an attendance certificate, which is great, and a feedback form. If you could please fill in this online feedback form, it would be fantastic, because that helps us to improve our events and it also helps us report back to our funders. If you could post your events on our event Padlet, the link's there and the QR code's there if you need it. If for any reason you can't get into that, just post your questions in the chat box and we'll make sure they're added to the Padlet during the course of the webinar. So, without any further ado, I will hand you over to Matthew Mckeague of the Architectural Heritage Fund. Welcome, Matthew.
Thanks, Bev. Welcome, everybody, to this Open High Streets event focused on Sunderland and the lessons learned from High Street West. So I'm Matthew Mckeague. I'm the Chief Executive of the Architectural Heritage Funds. The Open High Streets programme is funded by AHF, thanks to funding from the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, and supported by Historic England. The programme is aiming to support social enterprises and charities leading heritage-led regeneration projects on the high street in town centres and city centres. And it forms part of the Future High Street Fund alongside the High Street Heritage Action Zone programme, and our Transforming Places Through Heritage is very much part of that wider set of programmes. The Transforming Places programme itself has delivered significant amounts of grants and social investment in the past year. We've been going just over a year now. So in that time, we've delivered 34 project development grants totaling £1.4 million, 9 transformational capital grants equating to 2.5 million of investment, and 64 project viability grants. We've also been trialling some new forms of investment through community shares, so working with the community shares booster and Co-ops UK. So we've provided £200,000 of match for community ownership-led schemes in town centres and on high streets. If you want to know more about the funding we have available and the support we have available, go to our website, www.ahffund.org.uk. You'll find out the range of grants we have available there, and also the support you can get from our team and also our programme officers. Sunderland is very much a place that I know well, very dear to my heart. I was working for many years on another project called the Canny Space, which forms part of the sort of heritage-led regeneration projects in the city. And I would often walk down High Street West from the train station to Holy Trinity. It's fair to say it looks a bit forlorn, and still does. It's still relatively early days in this programme. And I thought, somebody really needs to pop up and do something with this particular set of buildings. And lo and behold, up popped the High Street Heritage Action Zone and Tyne and Weir and Pop Rex. This project really has a lot of features of what we're trying to achieve through transforming places. It's a BPT working alongside a social enterprise. It's a single project that's part of a wider strategic programme. It's got a range of stakeholders, key stakeholders, including the local authority, brought into the vision and driving forward a long-term vision and plan. And it's got heritage and culture very much a part of its regeneration efforts. So today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Jules Brown, HE's Historic Places Advisor for the North East and Yorkshire, who's going to talk about the HAS programme. And then we've got Martin from Tyne and Weir, Martin Hulse from Tyne and Weir BPT, and one of the Transforming Places Heritage Development Trusts, who's going to be talking about the partnership with Pop Rex, who we're showing a film as part of that. And then we're going to be joined by Sarah Carr, Sunderland City Council's Heritage Action Zone Manager, for a discussion on some of the lessons learned, or some of the lessons that are emerging. As I said, it's still quite an early days in this particular programme. So you can add your own questions. We're going to have a discussion first, and then you have got an opportunity to ask us some questions after. So without further ado, I will hand over to Jules to run through the Heritage Action Zone programme. Jules.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm Jules Brown from Historic England, Historic Places Advisor, one of the two Historic Places Advisors in the North East and Yorkshire. Next slide, please. So I'm going to introduce Heritage Action Zones for you in one slide. They've been going for 4 years. I've managed to concertina it into one slide. Here we go. Heritage Action Zones, they are a partnership in a historic place to bring about sustainable economic growth, placemaking, and community development by using the untapped potential of the historic environment. So there we are. That's the basic spiel of what a Heritage Action Zone is. They usually run for 4 or 5 years, depending on which type of zone they are. And they are a programme of projects with defined outcomes and a continuing legacy. They're mostly led, but not all of them, but mostly led by local authorities, with a funded project manager delivering a series of projects with community partners. Now that's the above the line description. The below the line stuff, why do these exist? Well, this is all about current government agendas. This is about growth. The place agenda, which is looking at all aspects of the way that places work, not just individual sector themes. And this is about providing public value from public investment. So zones are around taking those themes and applying them locally through the medium of Historic England. So using heritage to have an impact across multiple sectors, economic, environmental, cultural, social. And for us within Historic England, it is about using our funds, our expertise and our time effectively. So some buzzwords there for you about how we are using Heritage Action Zones to redeploy ourselves in a prioritised way, tailored, flexible, creative and coordinated. So this is about new ways of working for Historic England as well. Next slide, please. So here they all are. We have 20 Heritage Action Zones and 68 High Street Heritage Action Zones. They sound the same. They are quite different, actually. They're very different from our perspective internally to Historic England, and they're quite different also from the way that they operate on the ground the outcomes are broadly the same. The one we're talking about today is a Heritage Action Zone. Despite the name, which is a local convention, it is not a high street Heritage Action Zone. It is a Heritage Action Zone. So it's one of 20, and it was one of the first batch. So we're into year 4 here. The map is off our website. I've included some links there for you to follow to learn all about HAZs. The red ones are the HAZs, and the blue ones are the high street HAZs. And you can see that there are a few which have both. What will success deliver in these places? Well, they will be places where businesses want to be, places that attract higher growth, economic growth, places with longer dwell time. People want to stay there for longer, both in terms of hours and in terms of visitors over days and weeks. Places with a stronger sense of place based upon the familiar scene that's been inherited in these places, and places with outcomes beyond heritage. Heritage Action Zones are not just about improving the heritage, they're about using the heritage for further ends. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes. So here we are. This is the Sunderland Heritage Action Zone. There's the blurb about what it is, keywords: rejuvenate, sustainable growth, regeneration and cultural investment. The dots represent some of the physical projects, not all of them. And of course, not all of these projects are about physical intervention, capital works, etc. Some of these projects are much more about community engagement at the softer end of the spectrum as well. So I can't put dots on the map because they cover the whole zone and indeed beyond the zone. Things like research and community development. It's a 5-year program. We're in year 4. There are about 34, 36 projects. It's a relatively small budget, you will note, £1.6 million from Historic England and Sunderland City Council combined. That has gone up since the project began in 2017, which is a good thing. That's a success. We're bringing in more money from both of us. But the leverage is really strong. Some of this money was around in the neighbourhood before the HAZ began, but the HAZ is helping to implement it. And a lot of that 2.8 is going to be new money, which the HAZ has levered in. Obviously, we're doing a lot of evaluation, and that will come out in the final report. And there's a link there to more information about the Sunderland HAZ. That's my final slide. Thank you.
Thanks, Jules. We're going to come back to Jules in a short while for our discussion, but now I believe Martin is going to introduce a short film about the PopRex project. Martin, over to you.
Morning everyone. I was muted then. I run the Tyne Building Preservation Trust. We're a multi-project trust, and I'm here today in the boardroom of Alderman Fenwick's house, which is in Newcastle. I just want to show you this video. We produced it last year. It was really to highlight the meanwhile use that was ongoing on the high street in Sunderland, and also try and give you some understanding of how the project developed from its initial conception. So whether you can press the start the video.
Hi, my name's Martin Hulse. So I first came into these buildings about 3 years ago. They were absolutely disgusting. There was rubbish everywhere. They've been used as a squat for about a decade. Guys have been living in here, doing all sorts of things. There was plastic wire on the floor where they've been stealing all the copper. Floorboards are ripped up, holes in the wall. It just absolutely stank. And so it's quite a surprise to be in here today and inviting people in for coffee. It's quite a momentous jump in fortune to the building. But we've got such a huge journey to go. This is just like the tip of the iceberg of what needs to be done. We need to spend quite a lot of money on the buildings next door and start to kind of occupy the space and take it back. And hopefully working with Pop Recs to bring them in, bring life, creativity. We've had a lot of support from Sunderland Council. We've had a lot of support from a trust called the Architectural Heritage Fund and Historic England. My job is to find new uses for really old knackered buildings, buildings that haven't been used for a decade. And yeah, they may be kind of look a bit rough and need a bit of care and attention. But these are all good old solid buildings, and they were built to last. The timbers are huge and really strong. The walls are thick and built of stone and brick. And it just gives me a joy to kind of bring life back into the space and to know that people can use this again. These buildings were down for demolition. The developer wanted to build some student flats here. But fortunately the council stopped those plans and helped us get ownership of the building. And once we've got ownership, we can then start to first do some initial kind of emergency works, make the building safe, and then start to bring the life and the joy back into the buildings. And so that's what it feels like we're doing. We've been working with Sunderland College. We've had their apprentices in, their joiners and their electricians, trying to patch the building back together. And they've had a wonderful time. I'm looking through the building, taking it partly apart and then starting to put it back together again. I'm going to do another session with them under a project called Living Classroom. So they're learning all the time when they're in the building.
Hi, my name's Dave Harper and I'm laughably the guy who runs a company called Pop Recs Limited. We established ourselves in 2013 as part of the band Frankie the Heartstrings, and it's a bit of a reboot. A lot of shops, particularly cultural music shops, closing down on the high street. We opened one for 2 weeks, and that was 5, maybe 6 years ago, I think, so we're still here. We came to know Martin Hulse from the Tyne Building Preservation Trust about 3 years ago, when he was looking for something new to put in one of his projects, and having asked a lot of people in the East End of Sunderland, we were very flattered to find out that they mentioned us. And our thinking behind Pop Recs is that we can circumnavigate a lot of the bureaucracy which prevents creative people in Sunderland getting to the point where they've got a product and doing something. We could be the anecdote to that. We could be the hands that put the fingers in the holes of the dam and try to support people, because we didn't have that support when we were younger. So this is essentially a vanity project. It's something I would have liked when I was young, when I was growing up. The support would have been greatly welcome. It's probably an actual example of true partnership working, because we all have to work hard, and this is definitely a bigger project than I think anyone thought it was at the start, although having walls has been quite a boon for us down here. It means we can actually be in here now. But in the next couple of years we hope to be thinking about occupying the space next door, which is formerly bins, the original bins in Sunderland, and that's when we think the project will really start to take focus for everyone else who hasn't been involved and going crazy with it for 3 years now.
We spent a lot of time in the community because it's really a community-based project. We want to know what kind of activity they want to happen in their area. And they said they wanted culture and arts activity. And they gave us the name of Pop Recs. So it was the community engagement that we were led to Pop Recs. And that's where that kind of partnership and relationship started. And so yeah, we don't know where it's going to end up, but we're just kind of working together to see whether we can create a financially viable project. And hopefully they'll be able to rent out rooms to artists and other creatives. And everyone will kind of gather in the coffee shop around that coffee machine. And all of them will have some economic activity, because the building's got to look after itself, it's got to make money. But it's got to be an enjoyable space, and a space where the community wants to kind of thrive and come.
Again. it's great to see that video. You know, I never tire from watching it. But so much has happened since the video was made. We're in the process of making the next video. We've now moved into the capital phase, or the first phase of the big capital works to the building. We've generated grants of about £750,000 from the Architectural Heritage Fund's Transitional Fund, and also through a partnership grant from Sunderland City Council and Historic England. That's allowed us to restore the shells of the 3 buildings and also bring ground floor activity to those 3 buildings. So Poprex on the video there are going to take 2 of the buildings, one as a coffee shop and the next door venue. And then the 3rd shop is going to be used by a food cooperative called Sunshine, who are online-based grocery, local grocery and organic products. And they're going to have a high street presence. So they're coming from the internet onto the high street, which I think is a real success. And we're calling it Pop Wrexham Family, so it's a number of organisations coming together. And each of those organisations is doing its own funding. They're all undertaking crowdfunding at the moment. Pop Wrexham has got a live crowdfunding project at the moment, and if you go to my Twitter feed or Pop Wrex, you'll get links to that. But no, hopefully you enjoyed the video, and it was great. It was produced by Sunderland University, a student called Amelia Turner. And the building's part of a European-wide project called Open Heritage, and that's what funded that scheme. So that's kind of a quick intro into the project.
Thanks, Martin. Right, I think now we're going to be joined by Sarah and Jules, if they can turn their webcams on. Brilliant. I thought that was a fantastic video, and the sort of there's a description of what many of us do, finding new uses for old knackered buildings. I don't think there was any better. Yeah, there's a very simple job description for us all to use in the future when we're doing any recruitment. So we've got a kind of a few questions we're going to pose to the panelists and run through and just have a bit of a debate on some of these questions. As Bev said earlier, there is the Padlet to put your own questions to the panelists. Please do use that. So first of all, and this is kind of question maybe to Jules in the first instance. Do you think projects like Pop Wrex and what's going on with that single project, do you think they can act as a catalyst for wider regeneration efforts like is happening in the HAS?
The short answer is yes, but I think there's 2 ways of looking at this. You could consider this as just one tiny little capital fabric project in the middle of a peripheral neighbourhood on the edge of the city centre. What impact will that have? Or you could consider it, which is really what it is, which is a community-led, neighbourhood-led, business-led, culture-led, small intervention in a much wider programme, which is happening across the city. As an individual project, it will have a much bigger impact than its footprint, if you like. So it is about the way that projects like this gather momentum as part of local strategy, local issues, priorities, and as part of partnership working. So yes, they can act as a catalyst, and often it is exactly projects like this which are so well connected that can have a much bigger impact, a hugely added value beyond just the capital repairs to the fabric.
Okay, and I guess Sunderland's put quite a lot of emphasis on heritage and culture-led regeneration. The City of Culture was a big driving force. I know when we were kind of developing the canny space. So I don't know, Sarah, do you think this is something that is really helping, or this project is really helping to drive that kind of, that bigger vision? You might be muted.
Am I on?
You're on.
I'm back. yeah, absolutely, and it's kind of really attracting other creatives in the area. So there's projects that are happening behind High Street West, and potential housing for creatives with studios as well. So it's really kind of yeah, it's kind of creating that kind of appetite as well for investment, further investment in the area. But really kind of trying to get that balance of real kind of business and cultural investment at the same time.
So that balance, you think, as well, individual projects like this can help to generate confidence and private sector investment alongside?
Yeah, absolutely, and it does sit within kind of the wider plans within the council. So for Sunderland Council, the city centre is a big priority at the moment. So what's happening on High Street West is absolutely kind of chiming with everything we're doing elsewhere, and some of the big investment along Riverside Sunderland, which has just recently launched. So it does fit into that bigger kind of regeneration portfolio.
Yeah.
I would also add that seeing this project as part of a portfolio, a programme such as the has allowed us to fund it. If this was a single project stood by itself, we would have found it really difficult to fund this. So because it was part of a much bigger commitment, a much bigger momentum, we were able to fund it much more easily and at a higher level.
Yeah, because that's quite interesting, isn't it? That making sure that whatever you're planning with an individual building or an individual use, wherever possible, fits within that wider plan, gives it greater credibility, potentially, greater access to different funding opportunities, and also it's part of that longer term plan that we know is so important to sustainability, and the fact that these programs often take not just 5 years but 10, 20 years to really make a difference to areas.
Yeah.
And Martin, have you seen from your time working in Sunderland that kind of Pop Recs kind of helped to bring in other kind of projects that weren't there before?
Yeah, it's been. I've worked in Sunderland for many years, and there's been a continual series of area-based regeneration schemes coming forward for the area. And where the trust specialises in is working between a social enterprise or a community interest company, and also dealing with councils and partnerships. And so we kind of fill that gap between the bottom-up approach and the top-down approach. And I think that's where our role has been so successful here and on other projects, is that these small community projects have such energy and such dynamism, and sometimes don't want to be constrained by formal partnerships and formal approaches. And you've got to kind of let them do what they're good at and not tie them down too much. And so we've spent a lot of time kind of being that intermediary between parties, which has been great. It's challenging but great, great fun.
I think it was kind of referenced there in the video about kind of bureaucracy and how frustrating people can find bidding for funds, and if you're about kind of delivering events, or you're about making music or making art, you don't want to be filling in 20-page kind of documents, and you haven't got a clue maybe where to start with some of those kind of budget questions or VAT. It's not really your bag, and I think that point about somebody that can navigate that and understand that, but really get where they're coming from, is quite an important role to play, that we don't always think about who is going to do that within our kind of within our programs and within our schemes. But you're right, that kind of that intermediary, that kind of brokerage is a really important kind of a really important role. Okay, so the HAS was not the first kind of scheme here, and I think in my time, I've worked in the North East for quite a few years. The North East Development Agency, I think, developed some kind of programs in the area. There have been New Deal for Communities schemes, not necessarily in this part of Sunderland, but regeneration programs are something that have a kind of time frame, and it's not kind of year zero for regeneration in this particular part of Sunderland. How do you kind of build, how do you learn the lessons, I guess, of those programs that came before? Do we learn the lessons of what came before in developing projects like this? Sarah, I don't know if you've got any thoughts about kind of what succeeded with the programs.
Yeah, so I mean, there'd been kind of various partnership grant schemes over the last 20 years in this part of the city within the HAS area. So there'd been kind of European funding and Townscape Heritage Initiative, which had all been successful, very traditional approach. So they were successful in restoring key buildings, but it just wasn't as comprehensive as the HAS. And obviously there's more money available through the HAS to do something more comprehensive as well. Interestingly, I think through the Townscape Heritage Initiative, 170 to 175 was offered a grant, but the owner didn't take it up at that time. Yeah, plenty of lessons to have been learned, but obviously the HAS has come along and offered that opportunity to kind of look at it more holistically.
Jules, Martin.
Yeah, it's just, I think, just because one area scheme closes, you know, the aspirations that weren't finished, or, you know, there's kind of unfinished business, and so those kind of pass on to the next scheme. And I think that's what happened here, is that for a decade, all the agencies have tried to solve this building problem, and it just didn't work. And the key was because of the ownership of the building. The owner wouldn't engage with the funders, and that was the kind of what stopped this project kind of happening. And that's when the council had to take action to deal with the ownership, because we couldn't get we couldn't sort the ownership out, and the council's role was to kind of deliver the ownership of the building to the project. And that's quite a difficult moment in any project, to show that it's the right time for the council to get involved.
Yeah,
I agree with that, and that demonstrates how longer term momentum, you need to learn from that longer term momentum as part of your kind of progress through the story of this neighbourhood, if you like. For Sunderland to apply to become a HAS, they had to demonstrate what they've done before. They had to demonstrate they were committed to what was going on. So Historic England was keen to understand what had gone before and why it had failed. But I think the most important thing to imagine is that each of these programs that Sarah described, say each of them was 5 years and they overlapped a little bit, say we've been going for 10 or 15 years already. The 5 years we're in now is just a piece of the jigsaw. It is not the start and end of the solution. So it's almost the 10 years that preceded this HAS program are probably more important than the HAS. And you might argue that the next 10 years beyond the HAS will be just as important, if not more important. So it's looking very long term at relationship building within a neighbourhood, within an area, and developing that strategy and momentum and networking, which can allow you to inject for 5 years and then see what happens. So it's a much longer continuum of activity, which this is part of, and it's that's making the difference here, in my view.
And I guess for smaller organisations, taking account of maybe what has gone before is really important. not just in terms of heritage programs, but kind of regeneration generally within a place. So looking back at, you know, maybe the evaluation of the New Deal for Communities program, or the whatever it might be, SRB. We've had loads of programs over the past kind of 20 odd years, maybe less in the past kind of 10 years, and maybe now we're starting to see more coming through. But we need to look at what those lessons are, and I guess really the local authority should be the historical memory of these programs, to make sure that kind of people are joining the dots. But equally, when we're developing a single project or an area-based project, we really need to be looking at what came before, because things need to be learned from those past programs. That's really, really vital. Ownership is often, you know, a thorny kind of subject with some of these buildings, and you mentioned that the owner was, I think they wanted to develop kind of student housing here and sweep the buildings kind of away. I know that the council bought the building and then transferred it to TWBPT to develop, which is I think often councils are expected to maybe CPO, but another option is to, you know, expedite matters to buy the building. But that was quite a critical moment, I guess, for this programme, and a credit, I guess, to Sunderland in really unlocking that problem and then handing it to Tyne and Weir to move forward with it. But that, to me, seems one of the kind of critical points in this programme, really. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
It was a huge moment. It was also supported by Historic England, who agreed that they would have to fund some emergency works to the building to reduce the risk that the trust was about to take on. The trust was set up by local authorities in 1979, so we've always been seen as a delivery vehicle for heritage projects in Tyne and Weir, and so we work with across 5 councils to keep that message alive. Even though we're an independent charity, the role of the local authorities is essential in these projects, partly for managing risk, but also looking at ownership. And it just the Heritage Action Zone also coming along helped to kind of generate the positivity towards this big step as well. And so it was a number of different elements that came together just kind of helped kind of the project succeed.
Sarah, do you think there's any other sort of critical things that the local authority, I'm sure there are a number of things, but yeah, any particular key roles you think that the local authority has to play in kind of schemes like this?
Well, I think they saw this as an opportunity. I mean, those buildings kind of, as you mentioned before, were kind of, you know, in a very derelict state, present a very negative image. They're in a kind of a main gateway to the city centre. So, you know, it was a real kind of opportunity to do something with those buildings, which have been in that state for a very, very long time. We've had, so the regeneration teams and kind of the property team within the council have a really kind of strong relationship, and we're kind of obviously kind of work very closely together on this, and that has happened elsewhere in the city, actually, as part of the HAS. So more recently we bought the Elephant Tea Rooms as well. So there is that kind of we are kind of looking at opportunities where we can buy properties to kind of facilitate that restoration and reuse. So that has really helped, that's kind of at the forefront really, and is really helping in terms of our development of the HAS.
I think that's a really important lesson about. Sorry, go on, Jules.
I was just going to say, we're finding that local authorities are intervening more and more on the high street now in terms of ownership. They're taking on longer term problematic properties as owners, and that gives local people a much stronger say than if they were retained, as traditional retail often tends to be, if they were retained by, you know, corporate portfolio investors. So this is a microcosm example of that. But the other point that I would make is that this is where public money, the rigours of public money come in. Historic England can really only fund the owner. If the owner doesn't want to be funded, the owner has to change, and that's a really difficult conundrum for us. There are ways that we can fund somebody who's demonstrating they are going to own it, and there's legalities around that, but that's a much more difficult one to square. So it was the council's commitment to buy it and pass it directly to the trust that allowed us to say, yes, we can fund those urgent works. So it was a kind of a triangle of trust there, that you would agree to buy it, we would agree to fund it, and you would agree to take on the ownership. So we all had to kind of believe in each other to make that happen, really.
I'm going to use the triangle of trust in future presentations. So I'll take that one.
I was just going to add that triangle of trust didn't happen overnight. It was kind of a long, it took it was a long period of like negotiation and planning, and so yeah.
Maybe we can get the Pop Rex team to come up with a song entitled Triangle of Trust. The point about the council's role is really, I think, important. People just think the council is kind of one monolithic thing, that all the communication is perfect. And having worked in a number of local authorities, that's definitely not always the case. And sometimes, the property people sit in a very different directorate to the regeneration people, that sit in a different one to the planning people, and connecting all those things in the work that we do. Again, it's about the networks, it's about the connection between people, understanding agendas is really important, and how maybe you understand that when you're a small kind of social enterprise, or whatever you might be kind of developing these projects is important to kind of think about. So I'd say that's a really important one, and the more active role that councils seem to be taking, which I know people have, not in Sunderland necessarily, but councils buying shopping centres and whatnot. This is a very sort of much more active in terms of addressing problems, and we know that the ownership can be a really difficult. The old kind of saying, we don't have problem buildings, we just have problem owners, but these are complicated issues, and thorny property rights issues are definitely there, and sometimes just buying the building can be more cost effective than going through difficult and lengthy legal processes. So having more active local authorities, I think, is really good to see, although it does obviously come with risks and needs to be done in a considered way. Okay. Martin, you talked a bit about kind of community engagement in this, and how the community helps come up with kind of the Pop Rex name and brand, and what other role did kind of community engagement play in developing the project?
What we found on this project was, for a heritage-based project, the significance wasn't great enough. Two of these buildings are grade 2 listed. We're in a conservation area, and that at the beginning wasn't enough to believe that the funding could come from a heritage-based funder, and we needed to look at different ways of bringing in funding, and that was more about use than heritage. What happened in these buildings was going to become more important than the heritage of the buildings. That was at the start of it. That's changed quite significantly since that. But at the beginning, it had to be a community-based scheme to have any chance of success. The community, when we engaged them initially, were very against residential because they'd had some problems with a number of hostels and temporary accommodation in the area. And so they wanted this vision of a cultural cafe where they could all come and meet and undertake events. And so they pushed that idea that culture should lead the project. And at the time, Sunderland was bidding to be the capital of culture for 2021, and so that fitted with that story. And so we pushed on that. We pushed on that route, and that's when PopRex was kind of given to us as a potential tenant or user of the building, because buildings have to be used. You know, my trust is just about restoring buildings. We need to find the user, and we need to put buildings back into use for them to survive. And so that's where it all came from. And it just so happened that they were in a short-term lease. They were wondering where they were going next, and we just worked with them then to develop the project. But then all things started to change because the conservation area was put on the at-risk register. The heritage action zone was created. Heritage then suddenly came back to the fore, and then the high street agenda came upon us. But it was all based on community engagement to start with, and it just so happened that it was so well located for these other programs that were coming around it.
And do you think the kind of community engagement has always been beneficial? Has it really helped to kind of, you know, hone the specifics of the project?
I think it's given it life and energy. Being able to put meanwhile use into the building was really important, but expensive. You know, it's difficult. It's difficult to take people into a ruined building and allow them to enjoy the space. Shouldn't be underestimated. I think community engagement is going to play a role as we go into the next phase, as we open the buildings again and start to bring activity to them. But these projects are a long time. You know, we've been working on this for 5 years. Sometimes it falls down, and you've got to pick it back up again and run and kind of build again. And so you see these kind of peaks and troughs of being able to engage with people. Because at the moment we can't take anyone into the building. We would love to take people in during the construction phase, but because of COVID, we just can't. We can't have that engagement at the moment. Yeah.
And you mentioned meanwhile use there. This is a very difficult building to put meanwhile use in, as the video said. It's kind of it's now got walls which it didn't always, I think, have. But it's sometimes seen as a bit of a kind of well, put in a meanwhile use, but that it can be a bit kind of a trite statement when you've got very little to work with, and it's not always an inexpensive option.
No, the health and safety impact of taking people into a building has got to be dealt with quite considerably. We were fortunate to get some funding from Arts Council to support the meanwhile use. We got support from Sunderland Culture. Again, going back to this European Open Heritage project, that also allowed us to undertake some of the community engagement. And so different funds were then brought in to support the meanwhile use. And there's not always enough budget in the capital project to do it, but it was just, it was fortunate that we had access to different funds to bring into that project.
I think meanwhile use sometimes we mean a longer time frame than just 6 months or 12 months. We're actually talking maybe 5 years. You know, and some people might be on a commercial lease for 5 years, and that might be seen as that's a successful use of a building. So when we mean meanwhile use, I think defining it a bit more, but also understanding what we're meaning and what we're getting into is quite important, and that it's not just some sort of easy, inexpensive option that we can do quickly, particularly when we're talking about very difficult historic buildings. Jules?
It's almost like a transitional use, which suggests something slightly longer than a meanwhile use. And meanwhile use is kind of often characterised as pop-up or camping, but a transitional use is much more grounded, and it's part of the process to move it forward.
Yes, I think that's important, and we don't just kind of take it as a sort of light option, really. And also there's also maybe when people are talking about uses and they're expecting this to be the use of a building for 25 years, is that a realistic expectation? If we can get a use in there that lasts for 5 to 10 years, but then the building is relatively easy to adapt into something else, that is a pretty good outcome for some of the buildings and projects that we're talking about. I don't know, in terms of
just on this point of the community engagement side, I think is really important. I think for this particular building and many other projects like it, it isn't really a fabric-led project, it's a people-led project. The fabric is the medium, it's not the goal. It is the goal. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is a really important set of historic buildings in a designated conservation area. Great, fine. But there's loads of these around the country. Making them happen is about people. So, you know, in movie terms, the fabric is the MacGuffin, not the plot. It's the people that are the plot. We want to tell the story of the people. The fabric just makes that happen. So I think that's a really important thing to get right. Although you are rescuing a building here, a building group, you're doing it for wider reasons. You're doing it because of the benefit that it will bring to the community, to the neighbourhood. And I think one thing that we at Historic England have done in recent years to characterise that is to change our single sentence vision, who we are and why we exist. And I'm paraphrasing here, but our vision is to improve people's lives by conserving heritage. It isn't to conserve heritage or to conserve heritage to improve people's lives. It's the other way around. People come first, even in our vision now. So, and I think that is a growing momentum in the sector, that it is about people first now.
I'd agree. I think the consensus around this now is, well, there is more of a consensus now that kind of people need to be much more front and centre. You know, taking the movie analogy, that, you know, maybe 15, 20 years ago, the architect was very much the leading role, and the fabric was very much the leading role, but they are very important in the wider cast, but kind of community needs, uses are much more kind of a part of the whole script now, I think. Sarah, is there any thoughts on community engagement? What works, what doesn't work, from your point of view in this particular kind of program's instance?
I mean, certainly for our programme, for community engagement, we've really been looking to kind of partner up with and align with other initiatives in the city. So, as Martin mentioned before, we've done quite a bit of work with Sunderland Culture, particularly on their Great Place programme funded by Arts Council. So really kind of tapping into existing networks and kind of promoting the HAS in that way. And then further up the High Street, on High Street West, we have a building there, Mackie's Corner, which so before the restoration, we used that ground floor and opened it up to visitors and residents, and brought in a series of art exhibitions. So that, I mean, that really kind of, you know, give people the opportunity to come into the building, which hadn't been accessible for years, and, you know, just kind of gave them that excitement of the potential of what this building could be.
And I think that's where kind of partnerships with creative organisations and arts organisations can really enhance a kind of programme like this. I've seen some of the sort of activity that's been going on in Sunderland. There was like a kind of inflatable octopus coming out of Mackie's Corner one day, which I didn't know anything about what was going on, so wondered what I'd been eating for breakfast that morning. But it was just, and that's where I think the public sector working with smaller organisations, working with creative organisations is really, really important to enhance these schemes, to really bring something of really good quality, and that really just get people out and talking about things in their area and their place and what they want from it.
Mm.
And that's quite a big part of the HAS programme, Jules. The kind of the cultural programme is I know that's that's something more on the kind of high street heritage action zone then, but Historic England see that as really an important part of the wider programme, don't they?
This is all part of the place agenda, that this isn't just about one sector, this is about sectors working together. So the historic environment sector is one, the cultural sector is one, community engagement, all trying to achieve similar goals. Those are just three. So Sunderland was actually a really good example of this, an early example of this, because the HAS came about at the time that Sunderland was bidding to become, I never know whether it's capital of culture or city of culture, whichever one it was, I'm sorry, at the time that it was bidding to do that, culture became a really strong angle to this HAS, and it still is, and it will remain so, because it is a strong part of Sunderland's offer, particularly in the city centre. So yeah, as you suggest there, Matthew, the High Street Heritage Action Zone programme, the 68 partnerships which began this year, the whole of that programme has a very large cultural programme element to it, which we're now rolling out in those 68 locations, alongside the normal HAS work, the kind of capital and community engagement HAS work. So you will start to see in these 68 locations over the next 3 to 4 years, specific cultural activity around the high street, around getting people interested in the history of the high street in their town centre, their local place, and using that to generate interest and enthusiasm, again, as a medium for. So it is a really growing connection, I think, between historic environment and culture.
Yeah, very interesting.
And of course, what do you mean by culture? What do you mean by culture? That's a whole different question, but you know what.
Yeah. I was seeing kind of, there was a debate about northern culture yesterday in Parliament, and comparison.
Yeah, Jake Berry.
The northern anyway. Their culture is Ewood Park and not much else, but yeah, the culture that we see in places like Sunderland is very varied and a bit more than the football club, great as it is. Okay, I'm conscious, I'm just looking, there are some questions coming through on the Padlet, which I've now found without cutting myself off, which is great news. Just a couple more questions. Soft skills in these programmes are quite important. Martin was talking about the brokerage between the top down and the bottom up type of role. I think that point about kind of how people bring different ingredients in a people's sense is quite important. Jules, do you have any thoughts on what kind of soft skills are really important to these programmes and schemes?
Yeah, I think they are really important. You know, to characterise it, getting the builders on site is the easy bit. It's, in a project like this, getting the builders on site is the easy bit. The next difficult bit is getting the funding to pay for them, and then the next difficult bit is how do you get the funding. So all of those early skills, which is so important to a project like this, are probably more important than understanding how historic buildings work from a technical point of view. So it is about things like being political with a small p, being able to persuade somebody of your case that this is the right thing to be able to be doing, being able to network well, to advocate well, to sort of have a really sound understanding of the local landscape, the local people landscape. And I think all those kind of things are really important, as well as being able to look for shortcuts and to experiment. I often describe the work that Martin does as alchemy. There's a magic to it. It's a bit mysterious. And it's not something that you can easily sort of describe. It's a way of working, and I think it does take a sort of a capacity to work in that way to make projects like this happen, because you are up against all of the red tape and the barriers and the Whitehall this and the form filling that to make it happen. So you have to guide your way through it. So there's an element of tenacity as well there. where you have to be able to be convinced that you're on the right path and stick to it, at the same time as being sort of experimental and sort of taking a few risks. So these softer skills, I think, are more important really than the technical historic environment skills, the technical building conservation skills.
Yeah.
I always challenge them. Well, it's partly, it's sometimes the other way in that what you're doing is delivering what people want. You've got the local authority, you've got historic teams who want to deliver this, and what the trust can do is act as a deliverer. And so all I recognise is I listen. Yes, I suppose I listen, and I know when the criteria are right, or when the time's right to push, and when the time's right not to push. And that's just understanding where everyone's coming from, I suppose. That's the.
Being able to read people, listening, as you say, being able to read people, understand how people work is really important.
Yeah, that's where empathy is really important. Alongside somebody that's tenacious and really on it, is how you test these things when you're recruiting. It's really quite it's difficult, so how we kind of develop those skills in our teams is really important, I think. But I think the alchemy kind of point, but also somebody that's not just an alchemist, not just somebody that can do the big grand visions and not deliver anything. There might be some of those in government at the moment. That kind of, how do we make sure that we've got people that have got really good ideas that can also make sure that they're delivering as well is really, really important, I think. So being able to understand those forms and fill out, what can be laborious sort of paperwork, challenging it maybe where necessary, but equally doing some of the thinking and the entrepreneurial stuff. That's a really interesting combination of skills and knowledge, I think.
Jules knows that I can't fill forms in very well. I'm not.
You cannot fill forms in, Martin. Boy, can you not fill forms in. And, on a serious point, we have to send it back. So it is a mix of skills, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, I think we should go to. Maybe we'll come back to this as a final question about kind of what your key lesson is. So so far, but we'll end maybe with that. So just looking at the Padlet and some of the questions on here. Somebody's asked whether it's a bit of a weird partnership that's kind of helped to deliver this. The relationship between a very kind of radical organisation, maybe like PopRex and the City Council, in revitalising a part of the town. How do you bring that kind of very sort of maybe radical, in some ways, organisation together with a local authority? How do you manage to do that? I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts on that.
That's where I strongly believe the Building Preservation Trust comes in, to temper the two different sectors, because the council weren't keen to pass the buildings to PopRex. I don't think that would have happened. The project wouldn't have worked, and so the trust as an organisation that restores buildings or manages buildings was seen as the safe option. It was about risk, managing risk. So yeah, I think there is a need for some.
David, do you think that's important, that kind of there's a kind of somebody maybe in between the council and these smaller organisations to help kind of translate it into things that councillors and senior officers will be able to kind of work with?
Sorry, was that for me?
No, I wondered if Sarah had any thoughts on that, about the kind of how you kind of, can you hear me, Sarah?
Yes, I can. Yes, yeah.
Okay. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on sort of how partnership working between a local authority and small organisations is, yeah, how easy that is to deliver.
I mean, I think that relationship was there with Tyne Weir Building Preservation Trust, and goes back to Jules's triangle of trust as well. But you know, that's kind of being built up over a number of years. So those kind of lines of communication and that ongoing dialogue was kind of happening, you know, to kind of enable this. So you know, if that background wasn't there, you know, it would be very hard to just kind of suddenly create those connections and make that happen.
Yeah.
I often think that it's, as Jeff describes them, for free radical organisations, on situations like this, those are the ones you need. Those are actually the ones that will drive this forward. And obviously, there's, you know, it's public money. There's a load of due diligence that you have to do to make sure that these are not, you know, crazy types. But I think it is these kind of entrepreneurial risk takers that have allowed this kind of project to happen. So involving organisations that you might characterise as free radicals is good for us, because it forces us to wake up. It forces us to shake ourselves up and say, how can we do things slightly differently to allow this to happen? I think it works both ways, that we sometimes need our cage rattled to make things work as well. Yeah.
Okay, looking at some of the other questions, this is a very kind of practical one. Currently struggling to get building owners to take us up on grants. How have you, I can't read the bottom of it, but how have you achieved that? Any thoughts from anybody on getting building owners to take up grants?
Well, we've got a partnership scheme that's operating at the moment, but ours is slightly different because we've kind of targeted buildings, key buildings, and that there was already kind of a relationship there, and a kind of an opportunity to kind of there was already engagement with the building owners to then agree that, you know, for them to kind of then apply for the grant. So I know partnership schemes, Jules, you might want to come in here, in other hazards are working quite differently, and to that in Sunderland.
Yeah, it's a common question. I guess two answers I would give is, one, if you can find an exemplar, if you can find a lead example, then that often creates the momentum. And if that lead example is willing to work with other owners to demonstrate what the process they went through, it kind of breaks down some of the mystery of it. That can be really helpful. But I think the other point I would make is that that lead in to being able to offer the grant in the first place is just as important as the period of offer. So you want to be able to be confident that you can offer a grant, or a good percentage of what you want to be able to offer before you even apply for it, to a degree. So there has to be that dialogue early on. This goes back to the earlier question about lead-in time. You know, gone are the days when we will be able to offer anybody a grant if they don't demonstrate that they can actually spend it. So it's a really difficult one, and I know it is. But so, for example, in one of the houses I'm working with in Bishop Auckland, there was kind of a 2-year period of development, of site development, before we even confirmed the money. And it is still going to take us some persuasion for some of these buildings to take up grant. But some of the early exemplars will help with that.
I think that point about, yeah, the timeframes, I was looking back through some of the evaluation of kind of some previous kind of regeneration programs, and one of the points about the NDC program was that what it would have been really helpful, that was a 10-year program as well. One of the sort of learning points was there should be a sort of year zero, a setup year, and that enables you to kind of get everything together before you actually are expected to deliver anything. Yeah. And I think looking at programs in the future, how do we get year zero year 0 plus 1
Yeah.
even in some cases, because we have to put together these things so quickly, and it's not always as well considered as we might hope it to be.
You're right, and that's often driven by Whitehall timescales,
Yeah,
election timescales.
And I think more devolution of programs will inevitably maybe help to maybe come away on kind of link them to electoral cycles, which I don't think really helps with these long-term programs. Sustainability and the building. How do you think, it's still early days, still on site, sustainability, Martin, and how you're thinking about it in terms of this project? Have you got any kind of lessons about what you're thinking in terms of the long-term future for High Street West and the business plan side of things?
Yes, I think COVID has had a massive impact on people's business plans, especially in the cultural sector at the moment. We're producing a new business plan for PopRex as we speak, so that's been finalised next week. We're very conscious of the need that Trust's going to have to stay engaged with the building management for a number of years. We're going to have to buddy the different organisations that are moving in. We brought in Sunshine Cooperative to diversify the range of uses in the area. So it is a. I think what we need to do as well is bring the upper floors back into use. At the moment, the project's focused on the ground floor, but we need those upper floors back into use to bring more people to the area. And we need to look at the next building and the local area to bring people to that local area to increase footfall. And that's quite crucial.
Yeah, I think reviewing business plans is always important, but particularly at the moment, and those kind of assumptions that we've made and how they need to adapt is really critical, and also spreading the risk is really important as well. And it's still quite a difficult kind of part of Sunderland, and getting people to that location, marketing it, making sure that people know it's there, will be one of the challenges of the first few years, I expect.
Yes, yeah, and we're looking now at the next building in the area to restore, to increase again the number of users who are in the area. And I often say it's about this coffee machine and getting people around the coffee machine. The more people that are there, the more sustainable the project is.
Yes.
I would add that,
go on, Jules.
Sorry, yeah, I would add the question was about kind of the sustainability of the neighbourhood as well, and I think that's really important in this particular neighbourhood because it is so fragmented. You know, the amount of economic activity and places where people live is very spread out here, surrounded by sort of open spaces and road intersections and that kind of thing. So it does need a critical mass, and we're slowly, as we've talked about, over a long period of time, chipping away at that and adding into that, putting in bits of the jigsaw. And there is a risk that some of these will fail along the way if we don't get that critical mass. So that's why, again, the wider strategic visioning around this particular neighbourhood, both from a spatial planning point of view, where do we want new development, and from a community development and social planning point of view, how can we uplift this neighbourhood from the deprivation it suffers? All of that stuff is just as important as the fabric on this particular listed building, set of listed buildings, probably more important. So this comes back to this point about greater success is part of a momentum of a bigger project, a bigger strategic partnership.
Yeah, and I think that interconnectivity of issues with the building now, we see those more clearly than maybe we did in the past. We just kind of looked at it at a very kind of singular, you know, it's the building, it's the fabric, it's the conservation, it's the repair, it is all those things, but how do they interrelate to the community, the users, the economy is really, really vital to have an understanding of that. Martin, have you disappeared?
I've just gone off. I've just taken my webcam off.
Okay. I'll take this one from the Padlet, and then we'll go to kind of our key lesson. How did you find PopRex? That's obviously something I know a number of people have asked me is kind of how did that come about? Because I'm sure they'll want to try and find a similar organisation in their local area.
It sounds incredible, but it was through community engagement. It was initially through a workshop I held with the community, with a group of local artists, and they said what you need is the magic of PopRex. And so yeah, it came from asking people. I then went to Sunderland Culture, this new organisation that was looking at the Capital of Culture bid, and they said yes, PopRex, and so it started from the community.
So that community engagement was critical, really, to finding that potential end user. So a very practical outcome there for community engagement, as well as finding out on a general sense what people might want to use a building for, or might want to get from their area. Okay, right, we've got sort of 9 minutes, and I wanted to cover a couple, well, some final thoughts really from the panelists, from their experience really in Sunderland and on this house programme and with PopRex. From all the kind of things we've discussed and maybe you've thought about, what do you see as kind of one of the key lessons you take from Sunderland and this particular programme about how heritage-led regeneration projects like this and programmes like this should work? Jules, I'll go to you first. One key lesson.
I think my key lesson on this one is be prepared to experiment, do things differently, take a risk, be entrepreneurial, and I don't just apply that to the developer, to Martin. I apply that to us, the funder, the sector. We need to be able to be prepared to do things differently to enable things like this to happen in a very constricted market, a very constricted neighbourhood, a very constricted sector. So Historic England is already experimenting with the way that it's delivering things like this. So the High Street HAS programme is much freer than the HAS programme. We've already learned from what's happening in HAS to deliver the High Street HAS programme in a much more smooth way, we hope. There's still going to be more we can do. And I think being prepared to experiment, to think differently, and to consider the shortest route from A to B, while still delivering public value and still, you know, being clear on your strategic mission, I think is really important for us in the sector. And it's just characterised much more vibrantly by developers, BPT developers, Building Preservation Trust developers, who are prepared to be that kind of spark of enthusiasm and ingenuity and entrepreneurial spirit, which it is needed. So I would say, yeah, experimentation is really important.
Yeah, and I guess Sunderland's also attracting some quite interesting developers, partly maybe because of the sort of interesting work that's going on. So like people like Tyne.
Very much so. Very much so, on the neighbouring plot. Matthew, you've gone quiet for some reason.
Can you hear me again?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, that how it attracts kind of interesting developers programs like this, I think is that's another kind of topic we could explore. Sarah, any kind of thoughts from you on a key lesson that you think is definitely worth highlighting and taking away from your experience?
Yeah, I think the kind of the buzzword there is just collaboration, and just that need for effective partnership and the need to work with a kind of a diverse range of partners as well. So everything we've talked about this morning has been underpinned by that really kind of effective partnership working, and it's in this particular house we've got that, we've managed to kind of get that balance of commercial and cultural on the high street as well. So yeah, I would just kind of underline collaboration.
Yeah. Okay, Martin, your key lesson.
Yeah, I think it's important on that collaboration. I think it is important to add the Architectural Heritage Fund to the mix. I know we've talked about the council and Historic England, but this project was the other member. It wasn't a triangle. It was another member. The AHF came in from the beginning and helped change the story. So I think, you know, we shouldn't forget that as those feasibility grants that the AHF offers allow us to develop the vision and develop the idea. And that, I suppose that's what's happened, is that you sell a vision to people and people will buy into that. But you've got to give them that vision. You've got to have the tools to be able to show the path from these wrecks. These buildings were an utter disgrace. And now not bad, and I think, you know, that selling the vision takes a huge amount of time and effort. I didn't want the AHF to miss out on that kind of group.
Thank you, Martin. That's very kind. I think that point about taking a risk, and it still is a risk. Let's admit that kind of this is still very early days before we say these buildings, this use, this kind of area is you know, sustainable and the project has succeeded. But I do think our role in maybe investing in something that is a bit more risky to help bring that confidence maybe from other funders is an important role for us to continue to be able to play. You know, my take on kind of things is, you can't be too rigid in how you see these things going. If you say it's got to be like this, and it's then, you know, it's got to work like this, and these have got to be the partners, and this has got to be the use, and it must be that in 5 years and 10 years time. I don't think you're going to get too far, because being rigid when you're working with so many different variables over such a long time frame is really important to have that flexibility and a mindset that can deal with that, and that things are going to change is really, really important. Okay, I am conscious of the fact that we are 3 minutes away from 12 o'clock. I want to thank Sarah and Jules and Martin for a really good discussion. I hope you all found it useful and enjoyable, and you took some insights from it as well. A couple of plugs before I hand back to Bev to complete proceedings. But as Mine mentioned, there is a crowdfunding campaign going on at the moment for PopRex. You can donate to help get this project up and running. You can also buy a range of wonderful gifts from PopRex for your loved ones, all very Sunderland related for Christmas as a part of this. They are very, very good. And also the HTN conference next week, which is also another fabulous lineup of speakers, is still open. Get your ticket. It's very, very good value for money, and that can be accessed through the HTN website. Thank you, everybody. Bev, do you want to come back in there?
Hello, I'm back. Thank you so much, everybody. That's just been fantastic, and so many questions on Padlet too. I just wanted to say that because we've not managed to get through all of those questions on the Padlet, what I'll do is I'll download them all, I'll share them all with the panelists and get them to answer them for you, and I'll email every attendee with the answers so that you've all got a record of what's been said. But really, it's just left for me to say thanks for attending and bye for now until the next one. I'll give you a bit of a wave of where we are. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye. Bye.